A long time ago, in a faraway land, there lived an emperor who ruled over everything to the east of the sun. His name was Kublai Khan, and his empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf, and from the Arctic Circle to the South China Sea. In other words, Kublai Khan was the leader of the Mongol Empire. He controlled much of the world's silk, gold, spices, and tea, which made him unimaginably wealthy. Kublai Khan was also ambitious. He wanted to be the first man in history to rule over everything. By the late 1200s, he had conquered Persia, Korea, Vietnam, Russia, and parts of India. What one prize remained out of reach? Japan. Kublai Khan had heard stories about its riches, and he wanted it for himself. So in 1274, he sent his best general, a guy named Hulego Khan, to take it. The invasion force was massive, boasting around 900 ships and 40,000 troops. According to Mongol chroniclers, they had 50 elephants with them too, but the number of actual soldiers was likely closer to 40,000, 10,000 of which were mounted horsemen. Regardless, this army was powerful, well-equipped, and ruthless. The Japanese samurai, though outnumbered, fought fiercely. Kublai Khan's general managed to capture several coastal towns, including one called Hakata. But the Mongols had advanced too far, and their supply lines were being stretched thin. They needed more resources. They needed more men. Most importantly, they needed more ships. Kublai Khan wanted Hulao Khan to press forward, but the general refused. He knew they weren't ready. And just as he was preparing to regroup, a storm struck. Violent winds scattered the Mongol ships, wrecking hundreds along the Japanese coast. The survivors limped back to China. Kublai Khan was humiliated. The Japanese called the storm the Divine Wind, but the Mongols blamed themselves for the failed invasion. They went back to work, training more soldiers, building more ships, and gathering more supplies. 7 years later, in 1281, Kublai Khan tried again. This time he assembled the greatest navy in history. Historians estimate it included over 4,000 ships and 140,000 soldiers. Chinese, Mongol, Korean. They were all ready to invade Kyushu, southern Japan, from two directions. One fleet from Korea, the other from China. But logistical problems delayed the Chinese fleet. The Korean forces arrived first. They landed at Hakata Bay in late July and waited for their comrades. The Japanese had fortified their coastlines and prepared for war. When the full Mongol force finally reunited near Hakata Bay weeks later, the Mongols were forced to lay siege to the city. The Japanese were ready for the coming battle. They'd set up fortifications, recruited villagers, and built giant barricades. These barriers were over 15 feet tall, and when the Mongols finally charged, the Japanese were waiting for them. They shot arrows, launched flaming projectiles, and threw grenades made of bamboo. The Mongol cavalry couldn't break through the barricades, and the Mongol archers couldn't fire accurately. Kublai Khan's generals wanted to retreat, but the Mongols were exhausted and they had sailed too far to go home without supplies. They were stuck. Then the weather took a turn. Late in the evening on September 1281, a massive typhoon hit. It struck with such force that thousands of Mongol ships were smashed to pieces. Some were thrown against rocks. Others sank with all hands aboard. Survivors were either killed by Japanese warriors or executed later. It was a complete disaster. The storm was seen by the Japanese as divine intervention, the Kamikaze, or divine wind, sent by the gods to protect Japan. For the Mongols, it was simply an inconvenient fact of nature. Kublai Khan would never try to invade Japan again. The entire episode had been incredibly costly. But the lives of his men weren't worth all that much anyway. There was always more soldiers to train, more ships to build, more taxes to collect. The Mongol Empire was too vast and too rich to let a little thing like a storm get in its way. Kublai Khan spent his remaining years expanding his empire further. But after his death in 1294, his empire slowly began to decline. For centuries after the storms, the story of the lost fleet remained part of legend. But in 2011, off the coast of Takashima Island, divers discovered something incredible. Shipwrecks, weapons, and artifacts from the 13th century, all buried beneath the sand. The discovery has since been confirmed by archaeologists. They've uncovered wooden hulls, Chinese-style anchors, and Mongol weaponry. It's like they found an actual time capsule. Excavations are ongoing, but so far they've found over 4,000 relics. That is an insane number of objects from one shipwreck, but it makes sense given the size of the fleet. One ship alone could carry 200 men and dozens of horses. 4,000 is probably a conservative estimate. So what exactly do we have here? We have the remains of a flotilla, maybe 200 ships or more, all destroyed by the same storm. And based on their proximity to each other, we can safely assume that these vessels were once part of the same armada. We also have a lot of personal items: bronze mirrors, wine pots, copper coins, plates, armor, clothing, ceramic bowls. We've even found animal bones and rice grain. Through these everyday objects, we can get a glimpse of life aboard the ships. But the most interesting finds are the ships themselves. Up until now, the only evidence of the invasion fleet was scattered wreckage found along the coast. No one had ever found the actual ships because the sand had buried them. The current excavations are taking place in shallow water, only 33 feet deep. The site was discovered by accident when a diver noticed an anchor among some rocks. But the archaeological team was surprised to find that these wrecks haven't just survived for 700 years, they've also been perfectly preserved. All these years, the sand has protected them from oxygen and microorganisms, which means the wood is still intact. It's like stepping back in time. This amazing state of preservation has allowed scientists to identify the age and origin of the fleet. Most of the ships were built in China between 1258 and 1279. We know this because they used a type of pine tree that doesn't grow in Korea. We can also tell where the other ships came from. The larger vessels are made of Chinese fir, while the smaller ones are made of Korean pine. Based on their construction methods, we think the Chinese built the larger ships and the Koreans built the smaller ones. But how did these ships survive for 700 years beneath the ocean floor? After all, wood normally decays within a few decades. Well, it helps that the waters off the coast of Japan are cold and low in oxygen, but the main reason is the sand. Since ancient times, sediment has accumulated here, burying the ships and creating an oxygen-free environment. The wreck discovered by the team is typical of the others. It's 104 feet long, 26 feet wide, and 13 feet tall. Inside, archaeologists found planks of wood, iron nails, a clay oven, and the root cellar. Outside, they spotted ropes, pottery, and tools. And what about the cargo? What did they find inside the ship's hold? Surprisingly, nothing yet. It's going to take years to excavate these shipwrecks, if not decades. But what will they find? Weapons, armor, food, valuables? Who knows? Maybe they'll find treasure beyond Kublai Khan's wildest dreams. But perhaps the real treasure is the friends we made along the way. The legacy of the lost fleet is complex. On the one hand, it symbolizes the might of the Mongol Empire. At its peak, the Mongol armies boasted hundreds of thousands of troops, making it the largest fighting force in history. Its navy wasn't quite as impressive, but the 4,000-ship fleet was still capable of invading Japan. On the other hand, the fleet represents the limits of military ambition. No matter how powerful your navy, no matter how experienced your crew, you can never conquer the sea. Sometimes Mother Nature just wants to remind you who's really in charge. In medieval Japan, survivors of the Mongol invasion spread the word of the Kamikaze, the divine wind that saved Japan. Over the years, this legend grew and evolved, eventually becoming a major part of Japanese culture. 600 years later, when fighter pilots were dying in World War II, they, too, took comfort in the Kamikaze. Before their final mission, they would pray to the gods for strength and protection. And upon their deaths, they would be celebrated as heroes, their sacrifice ensuring Japan's safety. As for Kublai Khan, he died in 1294, never having realized his dream of conquering Japan. He was rich, powerful, and legendary, but the sea gave him a harsh lesson. Even the most powerful empires can't conquer nature. The lost fleet, once the mightiest in history, lies silent beneath the waves. If you liked the video, smash the like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more related content.